Recently, I made a brilliant change to my lifestyle that I fully recommend for every fan of Warhammer. Like many people, my diet consisted of many things: meats, potatoes, horrible chewy green things that I was conditioned to eat from a young age. But while I was eating my afternoon jam sandwich, a thought occurred to me. Do I actually need all of this extra food? How is all of this helping me? The best bit of my meal was the jam inside the sandwich I was eating, so couldn't I just skip all the other parts, like the bread, the butter and the pork pie on the side, and just have a meal that consisted of just jam? In fact, if I use the only jam strategy and eat it right out of the jar, it reduces the amount of washing up I do. Then I followed my train of thought to its natural conclusion. Now my fridge consists of 18 different varieties of jam and other sauces. This was going really well, but then something really weird happened. Yesterday, when I opened my fridge, the jams had split into two factions. The Marmite bottle was missing a head and the raspberry jam was looking really sinister. It turned out that I'd created a skirmish between the sauces. I'd set the conditions for a condiment conflict. It was a horseradish heresy. Get it? Ooh, bloody. Oh, that was a big one this time. It's a bit of a side effect, isn't it? Oh well, never mind. Ooh. Strawberry conserve. Delicious. Today I am going to explain the Horus Heresy to you. Not the story, but more like how exactly it came to exist. Because before we can talk about how Horus Lupercal was turned to the dark forces of chaos on Davin, how Ferrus Manus' head was tragically divorced from his body, before we can talk about how Sanguinius was totally killed by the Emperor and it was all just a false flag operation after all, we have to understand how the Horus Heresy really began. Our story starts in 1984 with a company called FASA Corporation who released a game called Battle Droids. It was reviewed well, it sold well, and despite pressure over the use of the word droid in the title, it received a second edition a year later. This second edition was known as Battletech. It featured giant robots fighting other giant robots on a hex-based map. But hold on, I hear you say, this is supposed to be a video about the Horus Heresy. I want to skip to the part where people start getting stabbed. Not so fast, dear viewer. This is an olden demon video where I lure you in with a few crowd-pleasing jokes and then start hitting you with the punishing economical realities of actually selling you tiny little men with guns so that you can roll dice with your friends. You see, there are basically two different ways of making money selling miniature games. You either go wide or you go deep. Battletech was, at its heart, a board game. You played it on a hex grid and you used paper standees for most of the mech designs in the box. It did that because it had 16 different mechs, like the Shadowhawk, the Wolverine, and the Warhammer, spread out amongst its 48 cardboard standees in the boxed set. But if you wanted to play with a Shadowhawk that wouldn't just blow away when someone closed a door too close to your table, you had to go out and buy a metal model of one. The problem then became either finding a store or sending off to Ralpatha, the company who had the rights to produce models for Battletech, to mail order you the models you required. That is one method of selling products for a miniature game. It's called going wide, where you create loads of different things with the idea being that someone will come along and buy 16 different mechs and then come back later and buy more the next time you make rules for more different mechs. It is a perfectly good way of making a miniatures game. Blood Bowl, Necromunda and Warcry are examples of games that have gone wide in their product line. However, there is a second way. The CEO of Games Workshop at that time, Brian Ansell, loved Battletech and was keen to do a game about giant robots fighting each other. However, Brian was neck deep in the business of selling miniatures and he was pretty good at it. Presumably, he had realised that selling a relatively large number of individual metal robot models would lead to Battletech developing a fatal flaw. So, he decided to do it a different way. Sell people a single plastic robot miniature. Step in the Warlord Titan. No, not this one, not this one, not even this one, the original Warlord Titan miniature. You see, plastic tooling was and still is expensive. If you want a plastic miniature, you have to cut the sprue of the models into metal sheets each time you want a new design. The trouble was, Workshop at the time was much smaller and had less operating cash than it had today. So the compromise was made. Make one set of tools for the frame of the robot model, and then make another set of tools for the 12 different weapons that fitted onto the robot. What Games Workshop ended up with was a robot with hundreds of different configurations, or to put it another way, hundreds of different robots. And the Games Workshop robot was larger than a Battletech robot. And the Games Workshop robot was lighter than a Battletech robot. And the Games Workshop robot could be fitted with new weapons on the fly by just pushing the parts together. In product design, this strategy is called going deep, having lots of different variants of the same thing. Because Brian Ansell understood how people brought models. Last year, we talked about who the vast majority of real customers of Games Workshop are, and surprise, surprise, they aren't me, and they aren't likely you. Unless you own a local gaming store, in which case they absolutely are you. You see, game stores purchase the majority of Games Workshop's stock, and even though these days Workshop has a web presence and over 500 stores around the world, independent stores still account for 60% of the sales. Meanwhile, back in the 80s, that percentage was much higher. So now we have to come back to the little shop simulation I do to explain sales behaviour. You have two wargamers who walk into your shop, your Adeptus Titanicus player and your Battletech player. Your Titanicus fan says, wow, this Adeptus Titanicus game is great fun. Hey, I want to make a Warlord Titan with 4 mega bolters. I'm going to put one on each arm and one on each shoulder. Can I buy another one of those Warlord Battle Titan box sets, please? I know they have 6 Titans in them. I'll just split the ones I don't need with my mate. Or some phrasing to that effect. Meanwhile, your Battletech fan says, wow, this Battletech game is great fun. I need another mech. I'm just going to go nip down to the library and use their photocopier machine to do it. Also, I'm going to be a while and I'm going to go to McDonald's, but then I'm going to eat the McDonald's in a Wimpy because they have a nicer atmosphere as well. That might be an exaggerated argument, but Brian Ansell presumably understood that wargamers have very particular behaviour. If a normal customer walks into a department store looking to buy a candle as a present for someone, they will likely leave with a candle, just any candle that they like the smell of. If a historical Henry goes into a store wanting to buy an Archer Battletech mech and that store is out of stock of Archer Battletech mechs, historical Henry will likely just walk off, even if that store has an entire wall of 20 other different Battletech mech designs. And that's a problem because of what happens next. You see, a year down the line, everyone is older. They have 4 o'clock shadows for some reason, and our Adeptus Titanicus fan and our Battletech fan both walk back into the store again. The Battletech player walks up to the counter and says, where's all the Battletech stuff? Oh, the store doesn't stock it anymore. Well, you should have stocked that single Archer mech that I wanted a year ago and then stocked whichever other Battletech model I fancied out of the dozens, if not hundreds of designs that are in all of these books. Meanwhile, the Titanicus player walks up to the counter and says, can I have a blister pack of these Reaver Titans, thanks? Because in miniature game sales terms, making a game that goes wide rather than deep and adds loads of new models to shop shelves isn't so much a double-edged sword, it's more like a shotgun that fires some of the shells backwards, usually directly into the faces of your retailers. Talking about going wide and deep, I'm going wide with my gold tier Ko-fi members. They each get a unique icon, and there are now so many of them, I've had to split them over 2 whole pages just to show them all off. Creating content on YouTube has never been harder, so if you want to see more of me and less adverts, please sign up and we can take the channel forward into the next few years with less interruptions. Meanwhile, back to the show. There is, however, a flaw in the Games Workshop strategy. If you only have one model in the box set, both players have to use that model. Jervis Johnson found the answer for this, and this answer was to tell players in the background of the book that these robots are fighting in a giant robot civil war. He used a small throwaway quote written by Rick Priestley in 1988's first book of the Astronomicon, the first expansion for Rogue Trader. This quote talked about a civil war in the Imperium where the Emperor ended it by throwing the War Master Horus into the Eye of Terror by his heel, and then Jervis just expanded the quote. Using these building blocks as a framework, out came more Titans, tanks and infantry that could be created en masse using plastic tooling and sold to everyone to use as part of the warring factions inside this civil war. And bingo, not only have you got a game system, but you also got a nice chunk of background to go with it. As vague and woolly as the background in 1988's Adeptus Titanicus was, it didn't matter, because while the product sold, more background could be written about them. Everything was being thrown together so quickly that the question of who exactly the War Master Horus was relitigated a few months later in White Dwarf magazine when Leman Russ was introduced as the first Primarch. From Adeptus Titanicus, we got 1989's Epic Space Marine, as eventually Games Workshop moved wider with its army offerings to give players Orcs, Eldar, and eventually many more alien armies. Games Workshop's brief move into board games in the early 90s led to the Horus Heresy board game in 1993 with cardboard tokens that let you fight the final battle on Terra. A few years later we moved into the second edition of 40k, which between 1995 and 1996 gave us both Codex Ultramarines and Codex Chaos. These books gave players the names of the Primarchs and a more solid look at the Horus Heresy. In the year 2000, we got the return of the legendary series of Index Astartes columns in White Dwarf magazine. These would go on to cover each of the first founding legions and a brief history of the background and eventual fate of their Primarchs every month over the course of several years. Games Workshop's book imprint, The Black Library, started the Horus Heresy series of novels with the critically acclaimed Horus Rising in 2006. In 2010, Fantasy Flight Games re-released a huge remade version of the Horus Heresy board game featuring the top quality design that they were known for at this time. In 2011, Forge World, Games Workshop's resin-only offshoot, created a pair of hardback books on the Badab War, a separate Space Marine versus Space Marine conflict that allowed them to sculpt and sell resin versions of older Space Marine armors, as well as Contemptor Dreadnoughts and a retro-designed Land Raider that looked just like the miniatures in the first edition of Epic. And on the back of the success of that, in 2012 we got the first full Horus Heresy Forge World book, the Horus Heresy Book 1, Betrayal. This set the visual design for the rules today, and this amazing series would go on for 9 massive books. In 2015 we were all surprised with the Horus Heresy Betrayal at Calth, a Games Workshop produced board game with miniatures thing that they had begun to produce at this time. Although I'm pretty sure that everyone just binned the cardboard board sections to use the models with the existing Forge World rules. In fact, these Forge World kits kept coming until in 2022 Games Workshop finally gave in and committed to a large-scale plastic release for the whole system. Out came the fantastic Horus Heresy Age of Darkness, a full plastic box set filled with tons of models. It even had a massive Spartan assault tank in it. Plus, it wasn't even a limited release, making it one of the best value box sets ever made. The final chapter in the Black Library book series was released in 2024 with the Horus Heresy, The End and the Death Volume 3. The Horus Heresy was finally over and narratively complete, and the game was finally positioned in the Games Workshop's rolling 3-year release cycle, right next to Warhammer 40,000 and Age of Sigmar. Therefore, in 2025, out came Horus Heresy Saturnine that allowed everyone on the internet to participate in the great Horus Heresy tradition of arguing about plastic robot models. You are now up to speed with the history of Games Workshop's third core game. If you want to see more videos like this, check out this one here, and I'll see you next time.